And that actually squares very nicely with the Stoic worldview. It says, accept the things that you can't control and work on the things that you can control.
So this is where I'd like to finish up the podcast. This is a high for me. This is the concept of temperate leadership, especially when you're navigating a crisis. And this is what we said at the start of the episode of this podcast was about making space for others. And what's the case for temperate leadership then? Like, why should it be part of our leadership mindset?
The classical Greeks talked about four virtue ethics. And they said, if you were thinking about what was desirable in a person, they said there were four virtuous qualities: courage, justice, wisdom, and temperance. And, courage, justice, and wisdom have gotten a fair bit of play. Courage, in particular, gets a lot of play. A lot of our Hollywood movies are about this. A lot of our stories about leadership are about sort of, courageous leaders, just leaders. Wisdom also gets a good play. The part of those four virtues that perhaps gets least play is temperance. In fact, temperance is sometimes seen as sort of a negative quality rather than a positive. It's seen and misunderstood as someone who is sort of opportunistic, who is prone to compromise, who doesn't really stand for anything, right? But in fact, it's quite the opposite. In fact, if you look at some of the most temperate leaders in modern times, two come to mind. One is Nelson Mandela, and the other is Itzhak Rabin. No one can accuse either of them for not being clear about what they stood for. I mean, both of them spent their whole lives fighting for the things they stood for. But at the same time, when there were pivotal moments to shape their country's futures, to shape the futures for their societies, they resisted the urge to say they know best. They resisted the urge to sort of lead from ahead. And in fact, what they wanted to do was to create the conditions where people in their societies could make those decisions for themselves, right? Going back to that notion of reciprocal leadership that we were talking about, or reciprocal power that we were talking about earlier. That's what made them temperate leaders, right? That they said, I am secure enough in my confidence and I'm secure enough in my values and what I stand for to say that that's not what this moment is about. But I'm going to actually transfer all of that goodwill to create legitimacy for a process that allows for this divided polity. In the case of Mandela, it was post apartheid South Africa. Mandela was arguably the most powerful president South Africa had seen in its history in that moment after he assumes the presidency at the end of apartheid. And he could have gotten whatever he wanted done. He could have shaped society whichever way he wanted because of the power of his personality and his goodwill. But what he does is he transfers all of that to a process and says, I'm going to invest that goodwill in a lasting legacy of democratic decision making. And I want, South Africans to over time muddle through and figure out what's right for them, rather than me tell you what's right for them. Mugabe across the border in Zimbabwe did the opposite. He used that tremendous power he had when he was at that pivotal moment to say, I figured it all out. Here's the way we're going to do it, etc. We're going to, basically create this new society. And, whether he was right or wrong, turned out he was largely wrong.